Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention. Maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. G'day and welcome to another episode of Voice of Gord. How's it going, guys? Got a special one for you today where I am on the other side of the microphone. A gentleman from England who goes by the Twitter anonymous handle KB Goldtooth, who is also a writer and involved with the Together movement, a kind of loosely affiliated resistance organization against the excesses of the COVID regime over in the UK. He was heavily inspired by the Freedom Convoy in Canada and wanted to speak with somebody who was involved in it. And he was introduced to me by my friend Melly over in Brighton. And here we are. So we had a nice chat, and Mr. Goldtooth is going to be using this interview you're about to hear as part of a written essay. Whenever that essay comes out, I'll be sharing it to my Twitter and my Substack. And in the show notes for this episode, I will link you to Mr. Goldtooth's Twitter and to a really lovely article he wrote for a publication in the UK called The Off Guardian about the Together movement and the sort of winding down and end of the COVID regime, as it were, in the UK. Next weekend, March 29th, 30th, and April 1st, or is it the 30th, 31st, and 1st? Anyway, I'll be in Louisville, Kentucky at the Mid-America Trucking Show. Hope to see some of you there. And I've got quite a posse already organized. If I've never met you in real life or only tangentially know you through this show, by all means, present yourself. I'm a friendly guy. I'd love to meet you and talk shop. I'll be writing a short Substack post, and I'll include my contact details in it for anyone that happens to be showing up at the Mid-America Trucking Show. And let's chat. Let's have a coffee. Let's have a beer. Let's do this in real life. Not everything is digital, and I'm always happy to meet new people. I'm a whole lot friendlier than what I sound. All right. Well, let's get on to a great interview with Mr. KB Goldtooth, and I hope to see some of you next weekend. Thanks a lot.
So the reason I want to write about the Freedom Convoy, it goes back to the first night it rolled into Ottawa. I'd already followed it on my phone, for the few days before when it had just been bobbing into news. I'd given it $100, nicest $100 I'd ever handed over, I think. And then we went out for my wife's birthday that night. Saw some old friends, and it was a weird time because you could feel in the UK, you could feel the COVID regime start to recede already from around the beginning of that year. You could feel things starting to change and starting to sort of slacken and soften. And so even seeing friends that night who were mostly old friends, who were mostly kind of lefty friends, who had we felt very alienated from for the preceding year or two. But it was like a significant birthday and everybody was coming together. Even then it felt like we were coming out of something. And we were sort of in a better position to even just argue our point of view than we had been for some time. We could feel they were less confident to stigmatize the point of view. They were less confident about the vaccination, etc. Then came home. I took too many magic mushrooms that night. I took what can only be described as a heroic dose, honestly, as you sometimes see used. And my missus went to bed, and I had a friend staying over who'd started out and done a bit himself. But he'd just gone to bed as well, and I was left awake, like unable to sleep because I'd taken too much. And then on my phone, I watched the trucks rolling into Ottawa, and there were like I don't think this was my heroic dose, but there were fireworks being sounded off, and the honking of the horns. And I watched this happen. And I was awake till 5 a.m, just watching everything I could on Twitter, live footage of it, people posting about it, and just
You may have seen mine on my other account. My previous Twitter account was suspended, and I'm still trying to get Elon Musk to get it out of penury. But I was live broadcasting video from Ottawa the first weekend the trucks were there, so you may have seen me.
Amazing. Well, let's get into that in just a second. My final point of this was I've never been. Is that me? That's annoying beeping. Sorry.
It's funny you started off with magic mushrooms, but like your video has these like weird. At some points it's normal. At some points it's all scrambled, and at some points you're moving like 3 times as fast.
Yeah, there you go, emulating, and I was up till 5 a.m. I was literally weeping and sobbing with joy. I was literally just crying and crying and crying, and it wasn't. I was so moved by what I saw. I knew there and then I'd never seen anything like it. I'd never seen such gentle, implacable people power. I was posting at the time. I can't remember. I said some things I thought were really like had a lot of truth to them. That was like, how annoying. Sorry. But was that that I felt that this sounds corny or it might sound overdone, but I really felt, and I think I still feel, that this was like a divinely inspired. That somebody upstairs had become intolerant of the pretensions of these despots down here, and had decided to draw a line. Had decided enough is enough, and had inspired an event that was it was like the perfect revolution almost. It just made all of these edifices which had oppressed so many of us in so many ways for so many months. It made them all just like look so brittle and pathetic, and it made people look so powerful. And so I was incredibly moved, and I wanted forever since to find a way of writing about it, and then through our mutual friend Mel and through your sharing my piece about the UK's resistance, and was able to talk to you. Through you, I was able to talk to BJ, and now I think I've got starting to build up some sort of first-hand accounts and some insights. And I read BJ's book, which is obviously very insightful and very useful text. And so I'm looking forward to actually being able to sort of spin some of these thoughts and feelings, fundamentally feelings, because I'm very moved by it all. I remain very moved by it all.
Many such cases, and if I may, one of the things that I felt and observed that first weekend in Ottawa, like even before I went into the city, because I started the day 50 kilometers west of Ottawa, about 35 miles. A friend of mine lives out that way. We went to his house, and then we went to one of these like motorway overpasses over top of Highway 417, which was where the main bulk of the trucks were coming in from Western Canada. And you could just tell from the people that were already there and waving flags on hockey sticks and all the goodwill that this was much deeper than the truckers. This was much deeper than even opposition to the mandates. This was a very human and emotional sort of cry out to say, like, we've had enough. Like, we've been abused. Our humanity has been debased. Our relationships have been debased, sullied, driven apart. Our very essence as humans has been in some way attacked by the COVID regime. And here come these guys with their big trucks to say enough is enough. And like it resonated with so many people. And like it was absolutely joyous to be there, to just be there around all those people was to feel like the essence of what it is to be human. It was incredible. It was an incredible feeling.
And it was, of course, the beauty of it being this inversion. Canada had for so long, Trudeau had looked like the personification of the new normal, and Canada had for so long looked like the distilled form of it in some degree. And people had looked so kind of oppressed there, the unvaccinated in particular, that to see it suddenly cast it off, even symbolically or even ephemerally, made it all the more powerful. But talk me through it, Gord. So, like, it'd be interesting to just hear your first-hand account of that passage to Ottawa, that first night in Ottawa, what brought you there, and the time you spent there subsequently.
So, full disclosure, I live in the United States now. My wife is American. I am Canadian. I have been a trucker my whole life. I still drive truck. I haul logs. I guess, I've always sort of paid attention to politics and whatnot. And, when you grow up in Canada where nothing happens, not very often, Canada's pretty quiet. It's a pretty quiet and sedate backwater of Western civilization. All the exciting, crazy shit happens next door in the United States or back over on your side of the pond. So when Trudeau sort of used the COVID crisis to basically become even more of an authoritarian tyrant than he already was, it sort of behooved me to pay more attention to what was going on back home, because I had moved to the United States on a full-time basis in 2016. So when I heard about the Freedom Convoy, it was like, these are my people. They're being abused by the government with no basis, right? So truckers in Canada and the United States and everywhere else in the world had been working through the COVID crisis, as it were, and actually being treated abominably even before the vaccine mandate came out, right? Truckers would go to these distribution centers, factories, facilities of any description, and, told to stay in their trucks, denied access to restroom facilities. They tried to initiate, contactless signing off on the bills of lading. Nobody wanted to deal with us. A bunch of different states, closed down their highway rest areas, truck stops closed. But we, truckers, were expected to continue working as the most essential of essential workers. And when Trudeau announced this mandate, there was no science behind it. There was no studies done to say that truckers spread COVID more than anybody else. And it also denied the fact that, being these most essential of essential workers, we'd already been through all of this crap, and we had done the best we could to keep the economy going, while the rest of people hid away at home in their pajamas, doing Zoom meetings, going to their jobs from home if they were working at all. But the truckers kept working, much like utility, electrical linemen, nurses, farmers, anybody who was at the energy sector, anybody who was working to keep the infrastructure and the lights of society on. And Trudeau decided to pick on us with no scientific basis, with nothing to it, and it was just viewed by so many people as just punishment, and for no reason. So I felt very, very strongly compelled to return to Canada and show some solidarity with my fellow truckers for this situation they found themselves in. So I went back home to Canada. I went to visit a friend of mine who happens to live near Ottawa. Spent Friday night at his house, and then on the Saturday morning we drove out to an overpass. There were so many scenes of these overpasses with people waving flags and signs, and we spent half the day there. And it was cold, man. I think it was showing minus 25 Celsius, and then with the wind chill, it was pushing 35 below. It felt that cold. It was like a traditional super cold Canadian winter day, yet thousands and thousands of people came out. So I think that speaks something to the sort of tenacious character of, there's something about being Canadian, aside from all the manufactured crap the CBC puts out about us, the fact that so many people came out on this particular weekend to support this movement against these conditions, against the cold and the wind, it just said something about the tenor and serious nature of this protest, and of the character of the people supporting it. I was completely moved by it all, man. It was amazing.
how long were you? So you're on the bridge half a day, and I've been kind of doing as part of the article. I have to draw a bit more of a concrete timeline for my own benefits, largely. And as I understand, there were a couple of main convoys coming into Ottawa separately. Did they both go under your underpass? I'm just curious as to sort of specifically how long, once one of them started to flow under, how long it went on for. Because there's a lot of speculation about how many trucks there were, how long they were, and I'm just wondering about
So I mean,
it
obviously,
like
there was some unfortunate online reporting before everybody got to Ottawa about convoys 50 miles long and hundreds of thousands of people in cars and trucks, and a lot of that was inflated. Mm-hmm. Ottawa is kind of on the border with Ontario and Quebec and Eastern Ontario, so there was probably 3 or 4 main convoys. There was one from Western Canada that picked people up all the way along from Vancouver, clear across the country, and got bigger and bigger and bigger as it came to Ottawa, and that's the one that I welcomed on the west side of Ottawa. There was other convoys, plural, that came from other parts of the province of Ontario, specifically like Toronto, Windsor, Niagara Falls, all the way up to Ottawa. And then there was others that came from Quebec and from the Maritimes, from Eastern Canada, that came in from the other direction. So the Freedom Convoy was decentralized, and it was kind of all over the place. So there was multiple convoys that came into Ottawa. The one I welcomed was the largest of them, and it sort of made a grand entrance into the city on the Saturday afternoon.
How long was it, and do you remember how long did it go on for? How long did it feel like going for?
Hours, because
really?
They were driving slow, and there was that many vehicles involved that it was literally hours, and we spent a lot of time on that overpass. And then finally, because it was so cold, me and my crew, there was about 8 or 9 of us that had come together as a group there amongst all the other people. We went back to my friend's house, warmed up, had something to eat, and then we came into the city.
Okay, talk me through that first night in Ottawa and what you encountered as you did you walk in on foot?
Well, yeah. So traffic getting into downtown Ottawa was basically paralyzed. A number of truckers had already gone in the night before and staked out positions on Wellington Street, which is the sort of street that runs in front of the Parliament buildings. So there's the Parliament buildings, which on the back side, facing north to the Ottawa River, and then Quebec, and then there's the south-facing side, which there's a big open space which faces Wellington Street, which is where most protests and ceremonies take place. And that's the side where all the truckers parked on. And then there was other streets that teed into Wellington Street, and they all quickly filled up with trucks and people. And by the time myself and my friends got down there, it was mid-afternoon, probably 3 or 4 o'clock, and there was just thousands and thousands of people everywhere, and it was just joyous, man. It felt like Mardi Gras or Burning Man or some kind of dance party, because by the time the sun went down and the night came in, you know what raves or techno parties are, right? Electronic
I'm a
festivals,
child of the 90s, Gord. I came of age in the 90s, I should say, so I know a thing or two about raves,
Yeah, so enthusiasts of that kind of music had set up their own sound systems at various locations in the streets of downtown Ottawa. So it felt like a rave party. It really people were dancing and boogieing and getting down, and because they were just finally somebody was doing something about this crazy regime we live under, and it just became this celebration. The very first night, the protest in Ottawa lasted for 3 weeks. But it only took the party to start 0 minutes. It became a party as soon as everybody showed up. It was literally a party from the word go.
What was the? I just imagine the locals at that moment, who weren't necessarily connected to it, weren't necessarily opposed to it. There must have just been a sense of complete bewilderment. What the fuck is this?
Yeah, well, I mean, and to give the citizens of Ottawa their due, yeah, it was loud. There was a lot of people down there, But I mean, it's the capital. You're going to expect protests. I mean, you want to live in the center of the cathedral. Occasionally, it's going to be loud and there's going to be lots of people there. But like, you know, a whole lot of big trucks with pneumatic air horns. It was pretty loud. I'll give them that. But like, you know, that level of discomfort is nothing compared to being fired from your job, having your family driven apart by the question of vaccine mandates, suffering under like very official scapegoating and outgrouping by government dictate and the messaging coming from Trudeau and the entire media ecosystem, which basically no longer functioned as a check on the state, but in fact acted as amplifiers of whatever the government wanted to say. So, you know, I'm sorry, residents of downtown Ottawa. Putting up with the honklitude is nothing compared to what people in Canada had dealt with for the previous 2 years.
Certainly isn't, and I can imagine some people. I mean, you some people. People have different approaches to the novel, don't they? They have different reactions to it, you know. And for some people, they were going to be, you know, they were going to. The sheer disruption was going to appall them instinctively, regardless of where they stood on mandates and such like. For others, it's, you know, the novelty of it would probably be quite fascinating, don't you think? I can imagine just looking out your window, if you hadn't been following the few reports about this convoy, and suddenly your city is full of trucks and music and people, just thinking that, just, you know, you may as well have just woken up in a different planet or something, you know?
There's something to that, but like one of my cousins came and met me. So my cousin Clayton and his wife Amber live in Ottawa. They're not right downtown, but they're close enough. And they came down to the party, and they're like, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to this city. This place is well. Ottawa's it's a capital city. It's the downtown, like Ottawa and the Greater Ottawa area are about 1 million people, but downtown is it's bureaucrats. You know, like it's government employees, and it sort of doesn't have a soul, and it's a very boring place. There's not much going on. I mean, you know, it's the capital city. I mean, there's something happening there, but like, as far as like having any kind of like artistic or cultural soul or anything, I mean, it's dead. So
it sounds like Canada's Brussels or something.
It's very square and lacking in anything resembling human joy. And when the Freedom Convoy came to town, you know, anybody who wasn't like, you know, speaking on behalf of the bureaucracy or the CBC were happy to have it, right? But, you know, the official propaganda arms had something different to say.
No doubt. So good. Tell me about your arrangements then that night and henceforth. What time did you go to bed that night? Did you walk all the way home? Did you sleep in someone's cab? What was the situation, and then how did you go on from there?
So I went back to my buddy's place out in Almont. So again, which is about 30 miles outside of the city, but we stayed fairly late.
Could you take a cab at that point in the middle of the night, or did you have to walk?
No, we had.
Or was it a 30-minute walk? Did you say?
My friend and I had brought our vehicles, but like, it was quite a walk to get back to our vehicles, and then we sort of drove home later that evening, but we spent most of the night there because it was just such a huge party. And like nobody went home. Like, I think people instinctively understood that this was history in the making and, you know, a symbolic end to the 2 years of COVID nightmare. And nobody wanted to go. Like, it was hard to peel ourselves away, but, you know, at some point you have to go to bed.
And for the next 3 weeks, talk me through what your arrangements were, what you did, how you got involved, if indeed further. And
so what happened with me is I'm an essential worker. At the time, I was hauling propane. So I worked for this propane distribution company here in the United States, and heating people's homes, heating businesses, heating government buildings. So I got no break. But what did happen is, long story short, the people I work for weren't very good at maintaining their trucks, and I was off because they didn't have a truck for me to drive. And so I used this time, at the same time as this is happening with my work, I get home and the media machine in Canada basically started trying to smear the convoy and smear the protests and tell lies about it and try and make it out like we were these evil Nazi assholes. And I was just having none of it. So like I just spent all day on Twitter just saying, you're lying. You're lying. Trudeau's lying. The media's lying. You guys are all lying. And because prior to this, I had appeared on a few podcasts discussing trucking issues. Because I've done a little bit of writing here and there before the Freedom Convoy happened on issues related to the trucking industry. Some people noticed what I was saying. They had saw the videos that I'd live streamed from Ottawa, and a couple of American media outlets and one in the UK, GB News and Unheard, asked me to write something about my experiences. So I did, and I went from 800 or 900 followers on Twitter to 3,000 within a week. And I had all these crazy journalists and politicians and stuff following me out of nowhere, because the rest of the world was trying to understand what was going on with the Freedom Convoy. And something I think people need to also acknowledge is because of the vaccine requirements and flight restrictions and how hard it was for people to travel, a lot of the foreign press weren't present in Ottawa at all. So the international press, such as it is, was relying on the locals to provide them with news and information about the convoy. And because the Canadian media are craven, lying sacks of shit who are lick spittles to power. The Trudeau government in 2019 had given them $600 million worth of subsidies because they were losing money, and nobody listens to them anymore because everybody knows they're liars. So the foreign press and the foreign media were starving for legitimate information about what was going on, what were the hows and whys, the causes behind it. And because I had been there and I had this tiny little presence on Twitter, I got all these invitations to write. So I did. And then, interestingly enough, I received an invitation from Fox News, who, lots of people hate them for various reasons. When I was younger, I didn't like them because they had pimped the Iraq War in 2003, which I was against and I'm still against. I never changed. Nothing about me has ever changed. Nothing about you has probably ever changed. The Overton windows have shifted. So now, if you're anti-war, lefty, anti-authoritarian, question the government person in 2003, in 2022, you're a far-right, neo-Nazi supporting hooligan who needs to be canceled, because that's where our media is at today. So anyway, I go on Fox News. I was on for 5 minutes on this lady named Laura Ingraham's show, and within 36 hours, my Twitter account was suspended. One of my best friends, who I've known since I was 5 years old, texted me, said, "I don't know who you are anymore. Don't ever talk to me again. Wow. You're evil." Wow. And no curiosity, no, oh, hey, Gord, how did you end up writing for Newsweek magazine? How did you end up on Fox News? Why do you think why do you think the opinions that you do? None of that. Just, you're bad and I'm not talking to you anymore. And that's carried on. There's old friends of mine, members of my own family, who to this day still won't talk to me and have never given me the opportunity to explain any of this, to present arguments, to have a rational adult discussion. None of that. This speaks to the whole feeling around the Freedom Convoy. It was not about the truckers. It wasn't even about the mandates as such. It's about what this regime has done to people's families and to their interpersonal relationships, and what it's done to society at large. And that still hasn't been solved, remedied, healed. None of that. It's 2023 and it's a year later, and a lot of these wounds are nowhere near being healed.
Fascinating. No, agreed we've all had those breaks, unfortunately. Listen, Gord, tell me. So, by the sounds of it, you were able, because of like work arrangements, to make some return visits to Ottawa. You weren't just there for the first day. I wonder if you could, if that's the case, I wonder if you could pick out from your time that you were able to be there in person subsequently, any engagements, conversations, events you witnessed, things you saw.
No, so I couldn't go back. Let's wind this back a bit. Yeah, no, I was only there that first weekend, but I mean, I was in contact. One of my friends is this guy named Tim, who's from Alberta. His truck was on Wellington Street. I was in constant contact with him. I actually set him up with an interview with Unheard, with Freddie Sayers at Unheard. I was going to go back after a couple of weeks had passed and it had become clear that my employment relationship with the propane company I worked for was dissolving. However, at that time, Trudeau invoked the Emergencies Act. Basically, the day after my Twitter account got canceled, Trudeau invokes the Emergencies Act, and I was literally afraid that if I went and crossed the border and Canada Customs people ran my name, they would see what I had written online and hold me at the border and have me detained, because the powers granted to the government under the Emergencies Act would have allowed them to do such a thing. So, like, I wanted to go home again and support the convoy more, but I had a legitimate fear that if I did so, I would fucking get arrested. Like, that's the powers that Trudeau granted himself under that Emergencies Act. So, like, I did not, in fact, go back to Ottawa, not because I didn't want to, but because it was within the realm of reason that I might have been arrested.
So, in its place, I guess it'd be interesting to, I think when I published my last piece about the UK through COVID, I kind of I alluded to the Freedom Convoy as having kind of changed everything, not just in Canada, but I felt like globally, it marked a boundary beyond which people wouldn't let themselves be pushed further. And it was just a week or so after the convoy rolled into Ottawa that Boris Johnson, the then Prime Minister here, announced the official rescinding of all the COVID restrictions, and didn't feel like an accident that was the case. I was wondering that said, just today, of course, we've just heard the official review of the Canadian government on the use of the Emergencies Act. It was it rubber stamped itself. It gave itself an A+ for rolling it out. And at the end of the day, people have presumably lost all sorts of. There've been all sorts of consequences for individuals. The convoy was ultimately routed from Ottawa, but it depends. There some things haven't come back. The mandates never returned in Canada in the same way. What is your overall reflection on the effectiveness and legacy of the convoy at this present moment, and your thoughts on this Emergencies Act in general as well?
Right. So, as far as the effect of the Freedom Convoy, as you said, Mr. Johnson in the United Kingdom began to undo COVID measures over there. In Canada, they were felt basically immediately. The leader of the Conservative Party was basically thrown out of his position, and the Conservative Party had to find a new leader, in part because that guy, his name's Aaron O'Toole, he was seen as not doing anything to oppose Justin Trudeau, and like he is Aaron O'Toole, leader of the Conservative Party at the time. It was in his mandate as the leader of Her Majesty's opposition to oppose, which he did not do. So he was thrown out, and they found another leader who later subsequently became Pierre Poilievre. A bunch of the provincial... So a lot of the questions around the mandates were, what's federal and what's provincial jurisdiction. The provinces began to unwind some of their mandates immediately. Saskatchewan immediately canceled their mask mandate. Alberta followed suit, vaccine mandates. And then in the months following, they all fell like dominoes. And of course, the media said, this has got nothing to do with the Freedom Convoy. No, it has everything to do with the Freedom Convoy. And one of the sort of unspoken things in the media and amongst the sort of establishment classes, other than to try and like dissemble on how they lied about this, was that the Freedom Convoy raised through GoFundMe, GiveSendGo, and other means of donation $24 million in a very short time. In testimony from representatives of GiveSendGo and GoFundMe in Canadian Parliament and at the Public Order Emergency Commission, it was shown that 88% of those donations were from Canadians in small donations. So, like, the Canadian political establishment was basically shit scared of the political ramifications of this. Like, they could not ignore those numbers, right? They could not ignore that if the Freedom Convoy was a political party, it would have outraised all of the other political parties. This is one of the reasons this guy, Jagmeet Singh, who's the leader of the NDP in Canada, he basically propped up Trudeau because the NDP are broke, and the only way for them to remain relevant is to, be like a lamprey on the side of a shark or a whale and be a parasite on the side of the Liberal Party, who are also driving Canada into a wall, quite frankly. But, the Freedom Convoy pointed all of these things out. And as far as, what was the second part of your question?
So it's about the Emergencies Act. But I suppose actually
right.
more. I mean, that's probably a predictable response. But more generally, perhaps, how do you think at the moment? So today, it looks like Trudeau's use of the Emergencies Act and then self-validation from a kind of Liberal-run inquiry of that use. You might look from where I'm sat and say, he looks pretty comfortably ensconced in his power still. And I suppose
he is. Unfortunately, he is.
Unfortunately,
he is. So the ruling from Justice Rouleau, who's a Canadian Supreme Court judge who is tasked with overseeing the Public Order Emergency Commission, which is an inquest into the invoking of the Emergencies Act, which is part and parcel of its invocation. Unfortunately, Mr. Rouleau has got a long history of service to the Liberal Party of Canada and has been noted by many commentators that he should have recused himself, which he did not. His 2,000-page report is full of contradictions and, acknowledging many points made by the protesters while also basically repeating lies that the government brought forward that were proven incorrect before him by evidence at the POEC that he just basically ignored. Much of that evidence brought forward by the police. The Ontario Provincial Police Intelligence Superintendent basically said that everything the government and the media were saying about violence or the threats or potential as such was hokum, totally manufactured nonsense that they shouldn't have engaged in. And Justice Rouleau dismissed this evidence. The cops said, no evidence of violence, no evidence that there was ever going to be any. You guys were making this up completely. There's zero, nothing. And Justice Rouleau just dismissed that. Who are you serving here? Are you serving the Canadian public or are you serving the Liberal Party? So, this is what happens when the government investigates itself, right? So, and Trudeau's just going to coast on this. Yeah, I think it's my contention, my belief that Trudeau is never going to face any accountability. He's going to run out his term to 2025, and we're just stuck with it. And any reckoning or accountability that the Canadian citizenry are going to get will have to be amongst ourselves and by ourselves, because our government is basically gone. And I don't know if you also saw the same day that this past Friday, which was 2 days ago, that the Rouleau ruling came out, the Canadian equivalent of the CIA or MI6, they're called CSIS, the Canadian Security and Intelligence Services, released a report showing that the Chinese Communist Party was up to their eyeballs in making sure Trudeau won re-election in the last election, and they brought all the receipts. It's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and this is the second time that the security services in Canada have made noise about incursions by the Chinese Communist Party into the government of Canada. The second time. They were accused of helping like 19 different members of parliament get elected in 2019, and now they have shown that the Chinese Communist Party threw all this money and effort at making sure Trudeau was reelected in 2021. That report was made public the same day as the Rouleau ruling came out. And in any normal functioning democracy or Western government, like that would be the end of them. But we live in this like post-Trump, post-COVID clown world where nothing makes sense anymore, and Trudeau's just going to skate. Like, nothing's going to stick to him. He's going to keep riding out his mandate, such as he has one, for as long as he can legally be allowed, and nothing is going to come of this, which is totally bizarre. Like, imagine if, Westminster or 10 Downing Street in the UK were found to have been totally financed by, say, the Germans or South Africa or Saudi Arabia or whoever. Some other foreign power had resulted in your guys' government getting elected. Right? That's what just happened in Canada. And nothing is happening. Like, there should be, like, pitchforks and torches at Parliament or 24 Sussex Drive demanding Trudeau resign, and nothing is going to happen. Because this is the clown world we live in.
Yeah, I did see that story. Was there? I mean, I know the Canadian media are famously servile, but was there any kind of echo of it in mainstream reporting there, or do you have a sense?
Well, so that CSIS report was put out by, to their great credit, the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's sort of national newspaper.
Yeah.
It'd be the equivalent of, what is it, the London Times or Financial Times of London or something?
The Times of London. The Times, as it's known. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, the Canadian equivalent of that, they publicized it and released it. Whether the rest of the Canadian establishment are going to do, if they're going to do anything with this information, remains to be seen, given how we've witnessed the Canadian government basically get away with murder for so long. I am very, very doubtful that this is going to do anything to Trudeau or his government.
Do you or your friends in Canada have a sense of how the events with the convoy have maybe affected or shifted public opinion or public perception of the issues of Trudeau, whether it's ultimately kind of even just contributing to the numbers of dissenters themselves, or do you feel like things are pretty much settled into two quite mutually exclusive camps of perception that are approximately there in the first place?
I think those camps pre-existed, but I think the camp who are based in reality, which is, the mandates were bad, Trudeau is bad, skepticism in the government, that camp is growing by the day. Fortunately, that camp are outside of politics, and that camp will not have a say until the next election. And due to the sort of fractious nature of Canadian Parliament, and we have multiple different parties, I don't know if it's ultimately going to mean anything. Like, I think we're sort of the victim of our own system here and the ability of the establishment to manipulate it as such.
I just glanced at one of the CTV news stories covering the Chinese meddling, and apparently the Chinese were giving students to assign them to volunteer in the election campaigns. They must have stood out like a sore thumb, Gord. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
very useful telephoners.
There's lots of immigrant communities in the UK and in many other countries, as there are anywhere. Canada has some pretty significant immigration from China and from Hong Kong and Taiwan. So there's sort of like, battling different, ideologies from that part of the world, like within our own country. There has been reports from last year of the Chinese Communist Party having their own police stations in Canada, which still haven't been properly investigated. And this is what happens when you have sort of immigrant enclaves where people haven't, they haven't done the American melting pot thing where they've like assimilated into the host country. They're still speaking their home tongue. They're still more connected to their home country than the new one. And they have these little communities. And then within those little communities, they have their own sort of political splits and their own things going on. And what's happened is that the Communist Party, and through its proxies in Canada, have gone around and basically either threatened Chinese people who are Canadian citizens into voting a certain way, or bribed others, or tried to influence people away from voting for the Conservative Party or the NDP or whoever and voting for the Liberals. And there's this whole influence operation which is being run by the Chinese Communist Party within Canada. And I mean, again, if we didn't live in clown world, this would be cause for some serious reform and action on the part of those who say they like democracy. But, like, is anything going to come of this? I don't know, and it remains to be seen.
Definitely. So, I was going to ask if it was very conscious during that period where the Freedom Convoy was set up. A lot of countries were dropping their COVID restrictions, such as England. At the same time, the Ukraine conflict was kind of really taking root, and that Trudeau was kind of shoved to the front of that kind of coalition in support of Ukraine as a kind of as a no doubt as a meaningless one, but as something of a figurehead. A lot of Zelensky photo shoots, a lot of pompous speeches, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the timing of that transition. And maybe even one thing that sort of confuses me a little bit when I think about Ukraine and I think about this well-documented influence of Chinese money, Chinese politics on governments like Trudeau's and Biden's is any idea on where China relates to the conflict in Ukraine and relates to Russia? I always assume they're sort of more sympathetic to Russia, but
well, they're growing that way. I just read something today about China is going to begin supplying the Russians with munitions and weapons to help them in their effort in the Ukraine, which is kind of hilarious.
That's kind of what you expect, yeah.
But as far as so at that time, so when the Freedom Convoy was sort of at its peak, and the Emergencies Act was invoked, a couple of days into the Emergencies Act was when Putin invaded Ukraine. And that, on the sort of like international media news stage, that basically usurped the Freedom Convoy immediately.
It did, yeah.
And sucked a lot of the air out of the room. And because the Emergencies Act had effectively crushed the convoy, everybody left Ottawa. The other protest locations at the border crossings were already leaving. Like, that had already been negotiated, and the Emergencies Act was really unnecessary. Yeah, the Russia-Ukraine thing basically took over, and it was very convenient for Trudeau for that to happen, which, it makes sense that he would pivot away to, the next current thing, as the kids say online. And the current thing has been Ukraine versus Russia. I just consider it like Cold War 2.0. And, as I mentioned earlier, I was against the war in Iraq. I went to Iraq war protests in 2002 and 2003 when I was a younger man. I'm still against them. I'm against all this American adventurism and, what some might call the global American empire, or just globalism in general, all these useless and stupid wars. And the Ukraine-Russia thing is just much the same. It's just the Cold War, all these rehashed ghouls that never let go of the 1960s that want to set up missile batteries in the Ukraine, and they won't let it go, and they're soaking Western taxpayers for hundreds of billions of dollars in aid being sent to the Ukraine, hundreds and billions of dollars being sent to weapons manufacturers in the United States and other places to build more guns, more fighter jets, more missiles, more artillery to carry on this meat grinder in the Ukraine, which is completely unnecessary. Like, the people of Ukraine don't need this. The people of Russia don't need it. Nobody needs it. Just let Ukraine be. Stop meddling in, Russia's sphere of influence. But no, the international chess players have to do their thing. And Trudeau, like the compliant little globalist fuck that he is, had to go along with it. And you would have seen recently that Canada sent a grand total of 4, count them, 4 Leopard tanks to help in the Ukraine effort. And they're probably been blown up already. Like, who knows? Like this is all symbolic shoveling of coal into the meat grinder. Like I can't even comment on it. It's so ridiculous and evil.
Agreed. All right, my last question for you, Gord, is last question of these interviews is your thoughts on the symbolism and the practical utility of the truck as an instrument of protest. What
That's a good one. That's a great question. So a lot of the people who are against the convoy, and I'm going to be making some broad sweeping generalizations here. So, obviously there's exceptions to all of the things I'm saying, but, sometimes stereotypes are true and have some basis in reality. A lot of the people who were and are against the Freedom Convoy and who were and are supportive of the broader COVID regime around the world tend to be people connected to government, to the technocrats, to the bureaucracy, to the pharmaceutical field, the I fucking love science people. And a lot of them tend to be urbanites. They tend to be people who live in cities, for the most part. And people who live in cities are real big fans of urbanism. And walkable cities. Everybody ride a bike everywhere. The car is evil. Personal transportation is responsible for the climate crisis. Suburbanites are bad people that vote for Trump. All of these kind of cliches, which, circulate in the minds of these folks. One of the citadels of the international globalist cathedral, like Ottawa, is overtaken by these very large trucks who took over the streets and, are driven by men who are not from these downtown areas and who do not share the same cultural and political sensitivities as the sort of, urbanite technocrat enjoyers. It is a symbol. It's like, wow, the heathens are here. They've come from out in the material reality to take over our digital reality in our beautiful urban centers with their ugly and obscene, very large trucks. And the symbolism of the truck in that context also shows these people's disconnect from reality insofar as, like, you need all of these large vehicles in order to make material reality function, in order to make global trade, moving shipping containers, moving large volumes of grain, of your products you order at Amazon, your 2-day delivery, your Uber Eats. None of this stuff works without trucks. So the symbolism of the truck being in this downtown area saying, you people whom we are serving, we are here to serve you, and we are telling you that how you're managing things and how you're talking about us is wrong. Like, it is very powerful to have these big rigs right downtown. Like, it's actually a pretty good distillation of the problems we're facing, even beyond COVID.
Absolutely. No, you saying that reminded me of a tweet. I was able to just remember one word I had in it, so I looked it up. It was from February 11th, 2022. So the digital world is intrinsically a lie, as in a non-reality. It spreads lies and it uses lies to more deeply insinuate itself everywhere. The laptop class are its natural collaborators. Truckers and farmers are its natural enemies. So, thank you so much, Gord, for sharing your thoughts on that. It's wonderful to talk to you. Really good.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's good to meet you online. I really, really enjoyed your piece about the Together movement in the UK. I know that all is not lost in the homeland of Orwell. It's good to hear from folks. Good to hear from folks such as yourself who are carrying on that spirit of the libertarian versus the authoritarian.
Quite right. Thank you so much, brother. Appreciate it. I'll get this edited and sent over to you. I might have to remove my name at the end there, but I'll get this over to you tonight or tomorrow morning at the latest, my friend.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much.
Have a lovely Sunday, Gord. Take care. All the best to you, man.
Yeah, peace and happy trails.